Now I'd like to start this class on ecosystems. Now if you look at the word ecosystems, you can see that the word is divided into two. Okay, that ecosystem is divided into two, eco and system. Okay, eco means environment, that is your surroundings, and system means interacting or interdependent complex. So ecosystem means an interdependent complex of the environment, and this name ecosystem was first proposed by Sir Arthur Tansley in 1935. So the definition of ecosystem is: an ecosystem is where the living organisms and non-living environment are inseparably interrelated and interact with each other. That means in an ecosystem there will be non-living things also, or non-living environment. There will be living organisms also, and they are inseparably interrelated. Okay, that means they are connected with each other, and at the same time they interact with each other. Inseparable means that one cannot live without the other, especially the living organisms cannot live without the non-living part of the environment. Now let's take the structure and functions of an environment. Okay. Now ecosystem has two major components, abiotic component and biotic component. Okay. Now biotic component, first we should talk about what is biotic component. Bio, the word bio means living. Okay. So biotic component is living component of an ecosystem, whereas abiotic component is a meaning without. Okay, so without, bio meaning living. Okay, so this is non-living component. So the two major components of ecosystem are non-living component and living component. Now let us see the definition of abiotic component. A biotic component of an ecosystem comprises of all the non-living factors that include light, temperature, climate, pressure, and all the inorganic substances like phosphorus, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen of the environment, etc. Now, when we take the biotic components, we are talking about the biotic factors include the living organisms of the environment. Alright, it can be plants and animals. They form the trophic structure. Trophic structure means where trophy means nourishment. So in the trophic structure of an environment, living organisms are distinguished on the basis of their nutritional relationships. So let us take in detail the biotic component. There is no need for us to talk about the abiotic component because they are non-living. Now biotic component, you can see that it is divided into two, autotrophic component and heterotrophic component. Okay, so trophic is the nutritional requirement, so auto, okay, auto means self. Okay, so under the autotrophic components include the autotrophs or the producers. Okay, so they are the components or the organisms which can produce their own food. For example, plants. As plants produce their own foods, they are known as autotrophs. Auto meaning self. So that means they self-produce their own food, or they are known as producers. Whereas the heterotrophic component, okay, or also known as heterotrophs, they are those organisms which depend on the producers. Now, heterotrophic component comprises of two, the consumers and the decomposers also known as detrivores. Now let us look at the consumers. What are the different types of consumers that will be there in an ecosystem? Okay, the consumers include primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So the primary consumers are directly dependent on the producers. The secondary consumers are dependent on the primary consumers, and the tertiary consumers are dependent on the secondary consumers. So you can see a kind of food chain is already being produced because the producers produce the food which is taken up by the consumers, which can be primary consumers who are directly dependent on the producers. Then there are the secondary consumers which are dependent on the primary consumers, and then you have the tertiary consumers who depend on the secondary consumers. Then we have another set of heterotrophic component or heterotrophs known as the decomposers. The decomposers are like bacteria and fungi that break down dead tissues. Next, we can see now the different kinds of ecosystems present on the surface of the earth. The ecosystems in the world may be divided into number one, terrestrial ecosystems and aquatic ecosystems. Okay, because we have the land as well as water on the surface of the earth. So we will definitely have two types of broad types of ecosystems: terrestrial ecosystems and aquatic ecosystems. Now, what is there in the terrestrial ecosystems? When you talk about the land, okay, you can have grassland ecosystems, you can have forest ecosystems, you can have desert ecosystems, you can have mountain ecosystems, etc. There will be lots other ecosystems on the under the terrestrial ecosystems. And when you take the aquatic part or the water part of the ecosystem, also known as aquatic ecosystems, the aquatic ecosystems can be divided into freshwater ecosystems, where there will be fresh water in the ponds. So it's going to be pond ecosystem, lakes, rivers, and springs. All of these will be having fresh water. So these come under the freshwater ecosystems. Then you can see the saltwater ecosystems. So it will be the sea and the oceans where the water is salty. All right, then you will be having saltwater ecosystems like the sea, which include the deep sea and estuaries. Estuaries are actually where the river and sea meet, the place where the river and sea meet. Okay, it also forms one kind of ecosystem. Then you have one wetland ecosystem where the land is always wet. In fact, it is swampy or marshy, like marsh, bog, and swamp, etc. Okay, here the land is never dry. Okay, it is half submerged in water. For example, you can take here an example of the Sundarbans. So accordingly, in this swampy place, you will be having a kind of ecosystem where the organisms like the plants and animals, they will be adjusted, or they will be adjusted to this environment, and you will be finding particular types of animals who will be adjusted to this swampy place or marshy place. Now, as we go further with the study of the ecosystems, there are some definitions which may come in your exams, and these are some definitions that you should know. Okay, so one definition is trophic level. Okay, what is trophic level? Okay, so trophic level is a group of organisms within an ecosystem which occupy the same level in a food chain. For example, primary producers make up the first trophic level, that is nutritional level. Trophic level is also nutritional level. Other trophic levels include primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers and decomposers or detrivores. We've already discussed it, but you are supposed to learn the definition by heart. Then we have community. Okay, the definition of a community. The community is a group of people living in the same place. Okay, that means if you take a group of people living in Darjeeling, okay, we call them a community. If you take a group of people living in Kagjora, we say the community of Kagjora, okay, so and so on, okay. And if you take the example of plants, you can say a community or a collection of plant species within a designated geographical unit having particular characteristics in common. So it could be plant species also present in a particular geographical unit or space. Okay. For example, you can be orchids, etc. Now, another definition which you should know is the food chain. What is food chain? Okay. So it is the transfer of energy from plants through a series of organisms by eating and being eaten constitutes a food chain. This also you have to learn by heart. Okay. So for example, here you can see the plants are eaten by the goats, goat is eaten by man. So this is a simple food chain. Okay. Now if you look at the plants, okay, the plants are the producers. So they get their energy from the sun, all right, and they store it in their leaves and stem. All right, and this energy which they have stored, all right, that will be eaten by the goat, so that energy from the plants is taken to the or eaten by the goat, so it is transferred from the plants to the goat. Not all the energy which the plants have acquired or have collected from the sun will go to the goat. Some of the energy from the plant will be expended through respiration. Some of the plants will die, and that also, all right, some of the energy is lost. So all the energy which has been captured by the plants from the sun will not go to the first, the herbivores. Okay, so a part of the energy will go to the goat, and then same thing here also, a lot of energy is wasted from the goat through respiration, through death. Okay, so man, when it consumes goat or this herbivore, it will not get the total energy which is present in the goat, and at the same time it will not get the energy which was captured by the plants. But this is a simple case of or an example of a food chain when the energy which has been captured by the plants from the sun, okay, is transferred from the plants to the goat, and then from the goat to man. Let's go further. Another definition is food web. Now, what is food web? When many food chains get interlinked, they form a food web. So you have to learn the definition of food web by heart. All right. Now let us look at this uh, example of food web. Now let us take the example of plants here. Okay, they are the autotrophs or the first level, or they are the primary producers. So the plants, they capture energy from the sun, all right, and store it in their leaves and stems. Then it can be consumed by the primary consumers. Okay, this is the second step. Primary consumers may be grasshoppers or ground squirrel. So they are, as these animals are directly dependent on the plants, they are also known as herbivores. Those animals that depend on plants only. Okay, they are known as herbivores. So the grasshoppers may be further consumed or eaten by scorpions. Okay, this is known in the third level as the secondary consumers, or they are also known as the primary carnivores. One animal eating another animal is also known as a carnivore, but they come under the primary carnivores. Then the scorpions can be eaten by the fox, or directly the ground squirrel can be eaten by the golden eagle. So fox here comes under the fourth level, and they are known as the tertiary consumers. All right, and it can also come under the topic, or we can say they come under the secondary carnivores. Now, if you look at this diagram carefully, you can see that from the plants, grasshoppers eat the plants, scorpions eat grasshoppers, and foxes eat scorpions. Okay, this is one food chain. Another food chain you can see is ground squirrels eat plants. Sorry, ground squirrels eat plants, and the foxes can also eat the ground squirrels. All right, so here you can see that this is another food chain. Sorry, and the third one is the ground squirrels, they eat plants, and then the golden eagle can also eat the ground squirrel. This is the third food chain. So you can see there is one food chain here, this is the second food chain, and this is the third food chain. Now here there are three food chains which are running simultaneously, but at the same time this food chain, now where is it? This first food chain, okay, you can see the fox, okay, it eats the scorpion, but at the same time it is interfering here and or interlinking, and it can also eat the ground squirrel. So this food chain and this food chain is interlinked because the fox is eating the scorpions and it is eating the ground squirrel. This interlink, okay, between two food chains or more than two, okay, is known as a food web. Now this type, in your, if you check your books, okay, you can see many of these examples and more complex um, examples where the food chains get interlinked with one another to form a very complex food web. This is an example of a very simple food web between the first and the second food chain. Now, energy flow through ecosystem. Okay, this is one part uh, in the topic which has been given by the university. All right. Now, we've already talked about the plants, okay, uh, accumulating energy from the capturing energy from the sun. Now, energy flow is just, okay, this captured energy of the plants which is transferred from one trophic level to another. So here you can see energy flow is transfer of energy from one trophic level to another. Trophic level is nutritional level. Okay, that means from the plants it will go to the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. Okay, so energy will be flowing from one trophic level to another. This is known as energy flow through the ecosystem. The energy is actually the energy which has been captured by the plants from the sun. Okay, so this energy flow is unidirectional, meaning it is flow in only one direction. That means it will flow from the plants, it will flow from the plants to the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. So the energy flows in an ecosystem from the producer level to the consumer level. At each trophic level, 80 to 90% of energy is lost by respiration and death. I'd already talked to you about it at the beginning. Hence, the amount of energy decreases from the producer level to consumer level. So, as the energy flows from the producers to the consumers, the amount of energy which the consumers get will always be less than what was there in the plants. Okay, and the same energy, when it goes further to the next consumer, okay, it will not get all the energy which was there in the previous consumer. It will always be less, and definitely less than the that found in the plants. So if you take a grassland community, how does energy flow in a grassland community? That means in a community where there are a lot of grasses and some animals there in the grassland. Okay, how does energy flow? So in a grassland community, the green plants, they trap maximum light energy. We've already talked about it because they are the producers. This energy gradually decreases towards the top consumer level as energy is lost through respiration and death. So from the grass, when it goes to the grasshoppers, for example, all right, the energy which is given or taken up by the grasshoppers will be less. Then the grasshoppers may be eaten by lizards. Okay, so the energy which has been got by the lizards from the grasshoppers will be even less. And the lizards may be eaten by hawks. So there also you'll be finding that the energy which has been got from the lizard will definitely be less. So when a food chain is short, the final consumers may get a large amount of energy. But when the food chain is long, but when the food chain is long, the final consumer may get a lesser amount of energy. Okay, so in the next class, okay, I'll talk more about energy flow through the ecosystem with regard to uh, the amount of energy which will be transferred from the plants to the consumers. For today, as today is the first class, okay, this will be a short class. Maybe the next class will be longer. So all this will be continued in the next class. Thank you.